Okay, guys, let's get started. Thank you very much for coming here to our session for the last day of the SharePoint conference. My name is Luca Bandinelli, and I am a program manager in the OneDrive SharePoint product group, specifically in the developer platform team. And
my name is Nguyen. I'm a senior software engineer with the developer platform team, working specifically with the SharePoint framework.
So today's session is all around SharePoint framework. And we will basically have the session split in two different parts. In the first part, we will do a very brief conversation about what SharePoint framework is. We will then go through the latest 1.8 features and capability we just released with 1.8, 1.81, and 1.82. And then just like at the other half of the session will be through the what's new. It will be on what we are planning to do. It will be on what is on our pipeline, and we're going to release in the next version of the SharePoint framework. And hopefully, if the demo gods are good with us, we are going to show you a very cool demo at the very end. So stick around, because the best will be at the very end. I know that's kind of cheesy, but that's the way it is. It's Vegas, baby. So SharePoint framework. How many of you guys are working on SharePoint framework already? How many of you do not know what SharePoint framework is? Okay, perfect. So very briefly and very quickly, SharePoint framework is a way to extend and customize the user experience on SharePoint by using JavaScript. It's completely JavaScript based. It gives you the ability to create your JavaScript and create these new functionalities and capabilities on top of SharePoint. You can use all the modern JavaScript development platforms and technologies in order to build such kind of components or extensions. You don't need to be an expert in SharePoint. You interact with SharePoint just like any other web service or web platform. You can use any of the rendering framework that you like, React, Angular, you pick the one you want. You can build solutions by using your preferred client. It's all based on modern technologies and modern web technologies that are OS agnostic, NPM, Gulp, Yeoman, and even the IDE. We don't have any dependencies on Microsoft IDEs. We use and love Visual Studio Code, but you can use whatever you want. There are people that can use Atom or any other IDE tools. SharePoint framework, it's something that is used by third-party developer as well as first-party developer. Everything that you see in SharePoint modern applications and modern pages is based on SPFx. All the out-of-the-box web part, all the new templates that are available in SharePoint Online, just like Communication Portal and Pages and Teams sites, they are all based on top of SharePoint framework. It's backward compatible. If you follow our rules and if you use SharePoint framework since the beginning, we promise that you do not need to upgrade your solution every time we ship a new version of SharePoint framework. You will be able to have web parts and other components in pages coexisting together, even if they are something that is 1.1 and something that is using the latest technology. Of course, two things to keep in mind. If you want your previous component to take advantages of new functionalities that we released in the latest version of SPFx, of course you have to upgrade your component. And every time you load different version of SPFx on the same page, there may be some performance implication on that, because the browser needs to load multiple versions of the same library, and that of course affects your browser. So the best practice is wherever possible to upgrade, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. Your old component will always continue to work. And of course, by using SharePoint framework, you can get access to all the web REST APIs that SharePoint supports, as well as APIs that are exposed to Microsoft Graph and any other web API that has been registered on top of your tenancy in Azure Active Directory. Very recently, we have expanded the SharePoint framework to go above and beyond SharePoint. You can now use SharePoint framework to build a solution that will show up in Microsoft Teams as tab solution, both on the web as well as the Reach client. And we are working to expose the SharePoint framework on Microsoft Office as well. And we will see something about that later during the presentation. So in a nutshell, what you can do with the SharePoint framework, you can create web parts, you can create SharePoint framework extensions, just like header, footer, or building some kind of command set, as well as field customizer on list and libraries. Everything is powered by Microsoft Graph, just like I said before, because you can access Microsoft Graph or any other web API through all these components. And the adoption of the SharePoint framework has been fantastic in the past years. We shipped the SharePoint framework a little bit more than 2 years ago. General availability was February 2017. And after that, we have had a stellar adoption and usage. And we also keep the SharePoint framework very alive. We had 10 major SharePoint framework upgrades since the time that we shipped it. So thank you very much for you to adopt this. These give us the ability to keep us honest and keep growing and putting even more features on top of SharePoint framework. So in terms of what SharePoint framework is, and this slide maybe doesn't give you a lot of, it gives you a lot of information, but let's try to go through that. So the SharePoint framework is not just like, thank you very much, is not just a JavaScript framework, but is much more. So you have a solution catalog that the administrators can use in order to Ethernet. Sorry, work in progress. You have an app catalog that the administrators can use in order to deploy the solution on your tenancy. And this app catalog have full governance. The administrators are able to quickly disable the the component if they find some vulnerabilities, and they are able to provide, as I said, application lifecycle manageability functionalities, so that upgrading version or doing version management through a single cockpit. They are also able to approve, reject, or remove web API requests through the same UX without needing to go to the Azure Active Directory and dealing with the Azure Active Directory portal, registering application services, and so forth. These capabilities are available both through UX as well as REST API if you want to automate these functionalities. We also have bootloader that gives you the functionality, that brings you the functionalities to the application itself. And the bootloader basically is the one that hosts all the information and gives you the ability to get the data that can be preloaded in the page, as well give you the ability to load the data from the SharePoint platform itself. Then we have the client runtime, which is a set of libraries that we provide to you and that are loaded inside the browser, and they give you the ability to interact with the SharePoint framework functionalities and capabilities. All the ability to interact with the events in the web part or in the control, the ability to access the web API, and so forth. Then we have the authentication pipeline that we provide through you through 3 different libraries to give you the ability to access the right data or even access the token, so that you can use the token the way you want within your solution and application. And then at the end, we have the developer toolchain, which I said before is based on modern technologies. We use Yeoman, NPM, and Gulp in order to do that. And it can be used across multiple platforms and devices. So SharePoint framework evolves constantly. When we started back in 2017, it was just web parts, and it was just SharePoint Online. Then we moved forward, and we targeted SharePoint on-prem with 2016 Feature Pack 2. We added extensions. We added the ability to access to Graph API. We then added component libraries, and then we added app pages, and we added the ability to connect to Teams. Dynamic data. I mean, you can see here that we keep growing and providing new functionalities and capabilities that you guys send to us. In the last version, which is SPFx 1.8, we came out with a bunch of cool features that started expanding above and beyond SharePoint. We went general available for SharePoint framework capability to build Teams tab in Microsoft Teams. We provided support for section background. We released a new type of component, which is a full page web part, which is called basically app page. We provided the functionality of isolated web part that gives you the ability to create a component and isolated the scope of that component to a single widget, so that the entire tenancy doesn't have access to the same web API that component does. We will talk about that later. We then enhanced and evolved our support for the latest version of TypeScript, and we provided the ability to, we enabled the ability to host the Teams tab provided hosted solution on SharePoint pages. Again, we'll talk about that later. As the new version, also in this version of SPFx, we've released developer preview library components, and we'll talk about that later, which gives you the ability to create the features, to basically create a package that has functionalities that can be reused across other components in your tenancy. So let's talk about now and tomorrow. So these are all the features that has been released in 1.8 that I was mentioning before. Let's start with the developing Teams tab using SharePoint Framework. With 1.8, you can now use the SharePoint Framework in order to build a solution that will show up in Teams. From a developer standpoint, the experience is extremely easy and we hope streamless. So you create your solution by using Yeoman, and then you code your solution, and then at the very end, while you are ready to deploy, to package your solution and hand your solution to the administrator, on the manifest, you can select the where the solution will show up. We have a new attribute in the manifest called supported host, and from there you can say that my solution, my component, will target a SharePoint page. We will target a SharePoint page either as a web part or a full page app, or it will target Microsoft Teams. Moreover, we have integrated the Teams SDK as part of our libraries, so that this gives you the ability to do two things. During development time, you can access at development time through IntelliSense all the functionalities that Microsoft Teams provides in the Teams SDK and program and develop against that. At runtime, this information shows up as part of your context, and you can consume that information in your component if your component is being used inside Microsoft Teams. Just like any other SharePoint Framework component, all the benefits of SharePoint Framework component, just like Lifecycle, App Catalog, and authentication pipeline, are available. So for example, if you want to create your component that's called Microsoft Graph or your web API, you will be able to do exactly the same as well, but even if your component shows up in Microsoft Teams, and you don't have to deal with with signing in, with the ability to provide the username and password, handling the token. We will do everything for you behind the scenes by using SharePoint Framework. And last but not least, we do provide the support for rich clients. So both Teams web application as well as Teams rich client will be able, and actually as a matter of fact are able, to show SPFx components in tabs. So I am a developer, I created my solution is ready, I did gulp package solution, I hand off the solution to the administrator. The administrator gets that solution, deploy that solution in the SharePoint App Catalog, and from there, because we recognize that the supported host attribute says add list Microsoft Teams or only Microsoft Teams, we enable in the ribbon a new button called Sync to Teams. When the admin clicks Sync to Teams, we use the Teams Microsoft Graph ALM APIs in order to create and runtime the manifest in the Microsoft Teams. And from that point over, the solution will be available in Microsoft Teams to be picked up and added to a channel. That step is quite important for two reasons. First off, if you're building a solution that is only using an SPFx component in Microsoft Teams, you do not need to learn the Microsoft Teams manifest. We will do everything for you. We will create the Microsoft Teams manifest at runtime the moment you click in that button. However, if you want to build a Microsoft Teams solution, which is a complex solution, because, for example, it will include the personal static tabs as well as bot and all the other capabilities and functionalities that Microsoft Teams allow in terms of development platform, you will not be able to use that feature because, as I said, that feature creates the manifest at runtime. This is the reason why, if you go to docs.microsoft.com right now, we provided documentation to tell you how to build your manifest. if you have a complex Microsoft Teams solution, it would tell you exactly the same information to put in order to be sure that Microsoft Teams understand the SPFx solution. So even if you want to create a complex solution in Microsoft Teams, you can do that, and you can also use SPFx for a tab. Any questions so far? Yes.
Is there any capability to limit the use of a component to a specific team channel?
Okay, so the question here is, I'm building a Microsoft Team tab solution using SPFx. This is more a kind of a Teams question, but I get that. Is there any capability so that I can limit the ability to add the one solution only on a specific channel or on a specific team? Not yet, but we are working on that. So stay tuned. Yes?
Does the SharePoint administrator need to be a Teams administrator for the sake of Teams?
So the question here is, does the SharePoint administrator need to be a Teams administrator in order to Teams to things to work? The answer is yes. We use the Teams Graph APIs, and the Teams Graph APIs check if you are an administrator on Teams, so that they can put, we can create the manifest in the Teams app catalog. Okay, so now my solution has been deployed. I am an end user. I go to any team channel. I select on the plus, and I will see my SPFx solution available just like any other first, second, and third-party Teams tab that are available for my tenancy. I select that, and we basically do the magic in order to understand where to persist the data in SharePoint. We also provide a very similar to SharePoint configuration experience, so that when you drop your SPFx solution on a Teams tab, the configuration experience will not be the dialog that you will have for any other Teams tab or any other provider-hosted Teams tab, but will be the same property pane experience that we have in SharePoint. And the reason why we did that is because we got feedbacks from several developers that they invested a lot of time and a lot of effort to provide a consistent configuration experience in the property pane, which is what SPFx allows you to do. And it was kind of problematic to create a different configuration experience depending if you are on SharePoint web page or anyone else. So that's the reason why we decided to have a property pane experience also in Teams. Yes, question over there. So the question here is that also supported for SPFx extensions? The answer is no. SPFx solution in Teams tab is only available if you create a web part kind of component. So as I was saying before, today it works on web as well as rich client. It's not working on Microsoft Teams Mobile yet, because Microsoft Teams Mobile does not support any kind of third-party custom tab. However, we are working with the Microsoft Teams Mobile team in order to be able to host an SPFx component as part of their view in the rich client. This is an example. This is a web part that we will show right now that is available in a Teams rich client. This is not a web UX. This is in the Teams rich client itself. This is early prototype. I saw that working in an alpha release. Is not available yet, but expect some news on this area from us during this calendar year. And last but not least, we talked with our partner that were part of our preview program and our dev kitchen that gave us a lot of feedbacks to be able to build this integration in the way that our customers need and our partners need in order to build successful solution. So thank you very much for your effort. We really, really appreciate you sticking with us. With that said, let's go to demo.
So here we have a SPFx page with a web part on it. And it's the same web part that I'll show you we'll deploy to Teams. So we're in the app catalog. We select the inventory solution. You'll see that the Sync to Teams button is available. And this button will only be available, like Luca mentioned, if you've added the Teams tab as a supported host in your manifest. And that's the only configuration you have to change. So we'll click Sync to Teams. It's successfully synced to the Teams solution. And so like Luca mentioned, SPFx tabs work both on the web client and the rich client. So let's go to my team here in the SharePoint Teams desktop app. And let's add a new tab. We'll add the inventory tab here. It shows up. Install it. Save it. And the first thing we'll see is that this is the same property pane configuration experience that you get when you're on a SharePoint page. So like Luca mentioned, we did a lot of work to have a consistent UX in terms of the configuration. So you can configure it, save it. So after the initial configuration, let's say you want to go back and kind of change some properties on the web part, it's the same experience across all the other tabs. There's a settings drop-down. We can click on that, and that just brings up the property pane again. We can configure it, close it, and now the tab's saved for everyone else in our team to see as well.
Cool. And before you guys are asking, the reason why we have that dialog that shows up during the Add a Tab flow that has the big Microsoft Team logo, the reason why we need that is because we need that in order to be able to be sure that in the SharePoint site that is connected to the Teams team, we have the right data structure that we use in order to persist all the information that will be saved as soon as the property pane closes. So that the next time that you come on this tab, you will see exactly the same configuration that you had when you configured it. Cool. App pages. With 1.8, we also release a new kind of component as part of SPFx, which is app pages. App pages really is nothing more than a web part that takes control of the full page and provides what we call kind of a ready-to-go experience for the end user. The reason why it's a ready-to-go experience is because the reasoning behind an app page is that you want to provide a solution that doesn't need any composition on authoring experience. You want the end user to go there, select the solution, and so the solution is ready without needing to connect web parts together or put the right web part on the right position. You also don't want the ability to have the web part to be removed or to be moved away, which is the reason why app pages doesn't have any authoring experience. You select the app page is ready for you in the page. You want to remove the app page from the page, you delete the page. You cannot edit the page. However, we do support a configuration experience so that app pages component can be configured or reconfigured by the end user where needed. Similar to the Teams tab scenario, in order for you to basically develop an app page, you just need to create your component, select as a web part, and then when you're done, as part of the manifest, the same supported hosted attribute is used to target app pages. And when supported hosted basically has the right information, we will be able to show the app page in the new app page picker that just got released the last month, and the end user is able to go there and select the app page. Everything else is exactly the same as any other SPFx component. You build, you package solution, you deploy in the app catalog, the tenant administrator has full control of whatever is happening in terms of lifecycle, in terms of where the code is loaded, in terms of web API access. Another way to basically fulfill or use the app page component is by using a special underscore layout page that we have that will point to that page. The scenario here is that assume that you want to have one single page across your site collection or across all the site collections that you have, that maybe is in the root site collection, that, I don't know, give you the ability to do people management. So you have a component that accesses your CRM system in the back, and you want to show the ability to do people management. You really don't want everybody to be able to create a new page in every site collection to do that. So what you can do, you can create a static link in our nav, or you can create a static link everywhere that points to an underscore layout page that we have. You point the component ID, you click on the page, and your app page will be available everywhere. Caveat on that specific approach is that you will not be able to have a configuration experience. On that page, you will only be able to have information that are surfaced by your application without any configuration experience. Any questions on app pages? Demo time.
Luca caught me off guard.
Sorry.
No, you're good. So
Let's
here
do it
we're
again.
going to go to create a new app page.
Demo time.
So we go to the new page experience. Like Luca mentioned, this is new as of last month. You'll see a new apps tab here. We'll click on apps. And just to reemphasize, to have your web part show up here is just as easy as adding SharePoint full page to the manifest as a supported host. And so this is the same inventory web part we saw in the last demo. So I'll click on this. We'll create a new page. We get a little nice preview here of it. This is customizable as well. You can either show a iframe experience of what the web part will look like as a full page app or provide your own image.
So what is the question, sorry?
That icon on the left, that's on the previous slide. It was in the manifest. Is that what that icon is?
Correct, yeah. Yes. You can also actually provide a separate icon different from the toolbox, which is the traditional page creation experience, versus the app page picker as well.
Yeah. Sorry, the question here was the icon that I said, sorry, on the app page, where do I specify that is part of the manifest? And just like John was mentioning, we use a different kind of attribute for that. And the reason is because the dimensions are different, so that you may want to have a different icon that is a little bit bigger and has a little kind of more explanatory things about your solution as an app page versus a web part.
So this is the initial configuration experience, and like Luca mentioned, you can only configure this once. So we'll call this deliveries. This names the page. We can add it to site nav for quick access. Once we're done, we'll click Save. This will create our page. And here we go. We have a full page app. You can have a reconfigure experience as well. This is configurable. You can set it to be configurable or not configurable in the manifest. Yes?
Question? So the question here is that what about the metadata of the pages? Are they be found on search or are be available on search and all the other things? Yes. This is a page. This is if you go to the page library, actually, if you want, we can go there, you will see that is just another page. But because we are using a different structure for this kind of app pages compared to the structure on the regular pages, we basically disabled the authoring experience. But at the end, that page is here in the page list. So everything that you do, then you are able to do in an SPFx component in order to see, I want this property to be searchable, and I don't want this to be searchable, yada, yada, they still apply over here. The other thing to mention here, which is I think is very important, when you do an app page, and John mentioned that during the flow, in the app page picker experience, the experience that you have on the right, we do render the component. So it's not a static thing. This is the rendering of the component. Of course, we disable the clicking and stuff like that, but the component does render. You can basically decide that during the add experience, you want to provide a different UX of your component if you want. And then you have a different experience when you add the component on the page itself. So this is live. If you scroll, you can do whatever you want. This is a real page. If you can see, it works. It's not just like a static image. So another thing to keep in mind when you develop your solution. Question? The question here is that, is this entire process automated by PowerShell? And I think that by entire process you mean, can I add a new app page using PowerShell? So actually, yes, and we have documentation to explain to you how to do that today. The promise is that we are working to make that process even better because we want to create a new Pages API available through Microsoft Graph. They are not there yet in the full fashion, just like we have today without Microsoft Graph, but the promise is to make you being able to do that even easier. Today you can do that, and it's documented in docs.microsoft.com. Cool. Thank you, John. Okay, coffee for everybody at the end of the session. Thank you very much. Okay. Domain isolated web part. This is another feature that we released in 1.8. And the question here is, what the hell is a domain isolated web part? So domain isolated web part for the end user is just a web part or just an app page. The promise that we are providing is that the end user has no idea that the component that is surfacing in the page is isolated or not. For the admin, so I'm going from the other way around, domain isolated web part provide a way to scope down specific permission that that component has to that component only, so that nothing else in your tenancy can access to the same API. Perfect example. I desperately need a web part that will show my executive mails. And in order to do that, I'm building a web part that using Microsoft Graph in order to get mail.read access through Microsoft Graph. Mail.read access is a very scary permission scope from admin standpoint. And because any web part in SharePoint is just a div in a page, we do not iframe. This is very important. If you didn't know that, apologies. Let me repeat again. Every web part or app page in a SharePoint page is just a div, is not iframed. Everything that get loaded from Contoso or your tenant name.sharepoint.com, which means that if I create a web part that needs access to Microsoft Graph mail.read, guess what? The moment I approve that, every piece of code in my tenancy can get access to mail.read through Microsoft Graph. I am a company that I don't have control of all the vendors that can develop on top of my company because I'm a huge company and I have very old sites that are basic on Classic and use script editor web part. Now that script editor web part can access to mail.read. Of course, it can access the mail.read with the current user because the access is always app plus user. But you can find creative way to put yourself in danger and such kind of things. This is the reason why we created isolated web part. Isolated web part is basically a way, I'll get that in a second. Isolated web part is basically a way to isolate that component, and the way we isolate that is by creating an iframe. So when you develop isolated web part as a developer, by the way, you have to do nothing but put an attribute on the manifest that say domain isolated true. We understand that, and during the package and deployment phase, we do a couple of things. We basically, first off, create a new app principal in AD. And we say that app principal will only be used for that component that you just deployed. We then create a new internet domain, which is basically Contoso. If your company name is Contoso, contoso.sharepoint.com is contoso-appid number.sharepoint.com. And finally, we register that reply URL, that internet domain as the reply URL of the newly created app principal in AD. When the component renders in the page, we understand that that component is isolated, so we put an iframe around that component and we load that component from the contoso-gui.sharepoint.com instead from the entire domain. And when you approve the API, you approve the API only for the contoso-gui.sharepoint.com domain. So then both the property pane and the web part itself runs from there. Nothing else in the page can access that API. And the reason why we want to make that seamless is just we're doing a bunch of work in order to make everything that the web part and the component does, including dynamic data, being able to work in isolated web part as well. We're not there yet, but that's kind of the work that we're doing. There was a question over there. So the question is that if isolated web part runs in an iframe, what are the performance? The performance are the performance of an iframe. So unfortunately, we cannot control the browser, and there are still performance that you pay. So now you have to make a decision. I'm trading security and IP with performances. The IP is also the other important part, because as a developer, you can say that I'm going to access my own web API, but my web API has proprietary intellectual property that I don't want other things to be called in the page. So I want to be sure that only my component called that, because I don't want to be able that other web parts can call my API. So you can do that by using isolated web part, but yes, you are doing a trade-off in between performances and security and protection. Not functionality does. So that's just like that's the reason why I say that they're working very, very hard to make functionalities like dynamic data and other capabilities that SPFx component have also available through isolated web part. As a matter of fact, for example, if you want to call Web API, Microsoft Graph, anything else through your isolated web part, you do exactly in the same way, just like any other web part. Again, as a developer, the only thing you should be aware of is that you change an attribute in the manifest, and from now on, your web part will be loaded as an isolated web part and not as a regular web part. Any questions? Oh, Jesus, I shouldn't have asked that question. Sorry, say that one more time?
What kind of creative ways we're talking about by people bypassing the security?
No, they don't bypass at all. I said that you can now access that API from everything else. So you can create another web part that will access the same API. You can go to script editor web part and insert the JavaScript code that will call that API. So you're not bypassing. You as an admin, and we make that very, very clear in the Manage API page, you as an admin, the moment you are approving a permission scope, you are approving that permission scope for the entire tenant, not for that component, except when you use isolated web part. When you use isolated web part, you are approving that permission scope or scopes only for that component. Yes?
So I created a domain isolated web part to test an external API.
Yes.
Now the test is successful. I uninstall the app from the tenant.
Yep. Yep. OK, so the question here is, I created, I tested, works perfectly. Now I want to do a cleanup. I removed the package from the app catalog. What happened behind the scenes? This is a today and tomorrow kind of an answer that I'm about to tell you. Today, absolutely nothing. You have to take care of everything by yourself. You have to go to AD and remove the app principal. Luckily, it's very easy. You do one click and you remove the app principal. We are doing work, talking to Landis about that yesterday. We are doing work so that not when you remove the package from the app catalog, because you may not have permission for that, because remember, you may be a different user. But when you go to the Web API, if you delete all the permission for that specific component, we are doing work in order to remove the application principal from AD as well. Stay tuned. This is going to happen. Unfortunately, it's not there now. Let me do the demo first, and then I'll come to you.
So we have a page here with the inventory web part non-isolated. So we're going to add, like Luca kind of talked about, a personal email web part that is isolated. We'll add it. It's loading. It's retrieving our messages. So from here, it looks pretty much the same as the inventory web part. You can hardly really tell that it's in an iframe or isolated. We will open the property pane. The property pane is also loaded in an iframe as well, a separate iframe from the web part. But the configuration experience is exactly the same. I can change this to 3. It loads. So performance isn't bad, considering we have iframe to iframe communication. Close this. And let's take a look at the DOM. Like Luca mentioned, it's really hard to tell visually that it is isolated on purpose. But if we check the web part, oops. We will see eventually. Hopefully, live demo. I haven't done this before.
Search for SharePoint.com, maybe. This
is this one. Is this isolated?
I know, you tell me. Well, let's check about that later. In the meantime,
Okay,
what was the question?
So my question is, if it is rendered in an iframe, how does it inherit the theme?
So I think the question you're asking is slightly different. The question you're asking is, if it's isolated, how does it inherit the context of the original page that...
The UI colors and the theme of the particular...
Oh yeah, so the theme and everything else, we do that for you. When we provide the context to you, so while you're doing that, let me switch back. When we provide the context to you, when we build the context server side, we don't provide you the context of the system page that we use to load the iframe, but we pipe the context of the page that is hosting your solution. So again, as a developer, everything in the runtime will give you the ability, will tell you that you are loading the page, loading the component from the original page. It's not telling you that you're loading the component from the underscore layout page. So while it's figuring out, let's keep going because we have still a lot of things to do over here. Okay, so next topic, Teams provider hosted solution in SharePoint. Question? Oh, good question. Thank you. So is the isolated only works for web part or it also works for everything? It works for everything. It works for app pages and it also works for Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams need to do some little tweaks that we are doing right now, but it's going to work very, very, very soon. So the promise is that, yes, it's working. Just a matter of us rolling the final code to make that happen. So is isolated web part? Take a look at the name. Works for extension? No, because it's called isolated web part. No, seriously, no, it only doesn't work for extension. It just works for app pages and web parts. So we do not have the concept of isolated extensions yet. If you want that, we should talk about that after the session because that's interesting. I really, really need to go, but yes. Security trim navigation has nothing to do with isolated web part, but I may have an answer for you in a second if you let me continue, because there's a lot of nice feature I want to show you. So Teams provider hosted solution in SharePoint, similar to web part in Microsoft Teams. We also work with the Teams product group in order to be able to host Microsoft Teams provider hosted based solution in SharePoint. And now this has been available and it's been generally available as per this week. So as per this week, if you have already a solution that was built for Microsoft Teams as a provider-hosted solution, that solution can be installed in SharePoint. And we try to do our best in order to make your life very, very easy for doing that. So an example, if your solution today exists, and your solution doesn't have any limits of which component can iframe your solution through content security policy, your solution already works. We did work in order to understand the Microsoft Teams manifest. You take the Microsoft Teams manifest, you deploy that in our SharePoint app catalog, and your solution is available. If you did no changes of the Microsoft Teams manifest, your solution will only be available as an app page in SharePoint. However, we worked with the Microsoft Teams in order to be able to tell, as a developer, if you want to show your Teams tab as a SharePoint solution in an app page or a SharePoint solution in a web part. We also did work in order to provide the SharePoint context in your solution. So now, as a Teams tab developer, for provider-hosted Teams tab, your solution can understand if it's been iframed in a SharePoint page, and if yes, you are access to some of the information that are available through the SharePoint context. Very quickly, demo, go.
So we have the page picker here again. We can go to apps. It's the same experience in terms of adding a Teams provider-hosted solution. So let's click on SurveyMonkey. We'll create a page. It's the same configuration experience if you were to add this solution into Teams. Click Save. And the rest of the SharePoint page experience in terms of creating it in that page is also the same. So I can just name this SPC survey and save it. And now I have my app page with the provider-hosted solution running.
And the same logic that we applied for SPFx in Teams applied for provider-hosted tab solution in SharePoint. We know that the provider-hosted developers spend a lot of time designing the right configuration experience to be in a dialog, which is the reason why we also show the same dialog experience in SharePoint if you're putting a Teams tab provider-hosted solution in SharePoint. And just like a shout out to these provider-hosted Teams tab developers that did fantastic job for us in order to make their solution working as per today in SharePoint. And they did very limited amount of work, but they invested a lot in order to be able to make that happen today. More and more other customers and other partners are coming, so that again, if you want to develop one solution that also use provider-hosted functionality for both Teams and Microsoft SharePoint, you can do that by using this technology now. So this is the end of what happened. And now let's go to the what next. What is in the pipeline? So for the next releases, I want to be clear here. We're not doing everything next release because our developers needs to go to vacation and do other things. So the PMs as well. But anyway, and we had a lot of things to do. But anyway, so this is everything that we are planning to do for the next releases in SharePoint Framework. As you can see, we want to do things in terms of above and beyond SharePoint and Teams. This is why you can see Office Admin over there. We want to do more work for the developers in terms of content security policies, as well as open sourcing Yeoman Generator. We want to do Teams integration improvements. We'll talk about that in a second. And we want also to integrate with other frameworks, just like the Fluid framework. And we are still figuring out, but we promise we're working very, very hard for what is the solution for the better developer tools for SharePoint Framework, as well as our store story. So let's start with the improvements that we want to do for integration with SharePoint Framework with Microsoft Teams. So as we said before, today you can create a Teams tab solution using SharePoint Framework. But today you can only do that for what Teams call configurable tabs, which are tabs that are only available as part of your channel or as part of your team. So if you want to create a personal static tab, today is not possible to do that with SharePoint Framework, but not tomorrow. So we are working, do you see what I did here? We are working with the SharePoint Teams product group in order to enable functionality and to extend the broadness of SharePoint Framework in Teams by giving the developer the ability to create personal static tab solutions using SPFx. The integration is going to be very, very similar to what we are doing today with the configurable tab. We will have a new attribute as supported host, which will be something just like personal or something like that in the manifest of your SPFx solution, name TBD. Will not come from an Italian guy, I promise. So the name will be better. And then when we read that information, we will be able to create the right manifest information in the Microsoft Teams manifest at runtime that will now surface the component in the Teams app catalog as a personal tab, and the end user will be able to access that. And just to provide expectation, we are going to go with feature parity first, and then we are trying to do something more. What I mean by that is just like V1 of this feature will give you the ability to create a Microsoft Teams personal static tab in the same way that you can create a personal static tab today. No configuration allowed. So there will be no configuration right now. But because we are using the SharePoint Framework infrastructure behind the scenes, so we are giving the ability for the Microsoft Teams product group to build a configuration experience also beside around the personal tab, because the SharePoint infrastructure will be able to store this configuration. But this will happen a little bit longer after that. OK, so this is the first thing. The second thing that we are going to do, and this is something that I think I'm pretty confident to say that we will release in the next version of a SharePoint Framework. We are going to put general availability in the library components that we just released as dev preview in 1.8. A library component, in a very nutshell, gives you the ability to create components that have functions and runtime functions that can be reused through your extensions and web part, and give you the ability basically to manage these runtime, your function in a different way. So you can have, can I say this is the DLL version of SPFx, for example? That you have basically a component that has functions that can be called across web parts and extension. Kind of a stretch it, maybe? Okay, okay, I'm not saying that again. This is the developer hi that says, PM, what the hell are you saying? Sorry. So basically, but in reality, just like you put your function over there, your function will be able to be called by web part and component. You can version your function different. You can have a centralized component that has the functions, and you don't need to replicate your function in your components, web parts or extension if you have more than one. Things to be aware of. All the components in the tenant get the same instance of the library because you put in a library, and yes, you can do version management of the component itself, but everything in the component get the next version, so everything can access at the same time only one version of the library. When you create a new solution, and in the Yeoman generator, you create a new solution, and then you do package solution, there can only be library component a part of the solution. So when you create a solution, be aware that if you want to create a library component, that's the only thing that is be part of that package when you deploy that. And in terms of references, the way it works today is that at development time, you have to create an npm link that you will be able to add in your solution in order to be able to reference your solution when you're developing that. Question? One. Come on, guys.
Domain-isolated web parts be able to consume library components?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Can I use component loader to load library to my web part, for example? SP component loader.
You use the component loader to
dynamically load the library to web part.
Oh, yes, you should be able to do that too. Yep.
Oh, sorry.
The question was if you can use the SP component loader to dynamically load the library components, and you definitely can, yes.
Cool. Next, and this one has a demo. Office support. So one of the other things that we want to do is to be able for you as a developer to create an SPFx component and surface that SPFx component in Office web application as well as Office rich client. The approach that we are taking for this integration is very, very similar with the approach that we took for integrating with Microsoft Teams. As a developer, the promise is that the only thing that you have to take care of is that you are putting this information as part of the SPFx manifest. We will do the plumbing with you. We will do the plumbing in terms of the Office libraries and give you the ability to consume the Office context from your solution. We are also working with the Office product group in order to figure out the integration with what is their centralized deployment features and capabilities that is available for enterprises today for develop Office add-ins. And similar to what is happening today, or exactly as is happening today with Microsoft Teams, we are also doing a lot of work to be sure that all the SPFx functionalities and capabilities like AD integration as well as Web API will work from Microsoft Office Web as well as a rich client. As you can see, there are still some things that needs to be decided. For example, do we want to have scope per Office client, or do we want to have one scope that says Office and that being available everywhere? Or how are we going to provide the manifest, because the Office manifest is way more complex than the Microsoft Teams manifest, so we need to do a work to be able to be sure that the manifest that we are creating at runtime is powerful enough for the component to load properly in an Office client or Office web. But that's what we are, one of the things, or one of the angles that we are working on to extend the SharePoint framework across multiple canvases, Office being one of those. And of course, in order to show you that we are really doing that, here's a demo.
Here I have the Office Web app open, and I will show you an SPFx web part running as a task pane add-in. So I can click here. It'll load my SPFx web part in the task pane. And this one interacts using the Office SDK with the document. So I can do things like find the word lazy. Highlighting, I can replace it. Let's say the quick brown fox jumps over the good dog. And it can also do plenty of other things, like we have code words, a lot of different acronyms. We love our acronyms at Microsoft. And we can just go ahead and do replacement in there. To kind of provide some context about how easy this was to develop, one of our college new hires, this was his very first project. And so it's all the same stuff you know in terms of developing an SPFx solution, at changing the manifest and getting it to work inside of the Office products.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that that code works, for example, are coming from a SharePoint list. So we are making a web API call in order to be able to gather the information, and it is happening just like any other web API call in an SPFx component. The developer didn't have to do any other kind of a strange magic in order to be able to access that. We'll talk about that later at the end, I promise, because there are more cool features, but I can't answer questions right now. Because I really, really, really want to be sure that our last demo works, and if it works, I want to show that to you. Can I switch? Sweet. That's fine. So someone was asking to me about security trim navigation and stuff like that. So can you do that today? No. But we are doing work to be sure that we can have new kind of extensions. And some of the things that we are considering as part of next releases of SharePoint Framework are navigation extensions and footer extension. For navigation extension, we're thinking about two different kind of extension. One of these extensions being a navigation data extension, where basically you will be able to build an SPFx component that only provides data. And we will take care of the rendering of the data. So the scenario here is that you want to reshuffle the way that we provide navigation. You want to remove some of the nodes. You want to have a standard navigation hierarchy and information available across all of your sites or in some of your sites, but you don't want to take care about the navigation rendering. And most importantly, you want that navigation to show up in the SharePoint mobile client in the same way that the navigation, the out-of-the-box navigation works. So the idea will be that you create a component. That component only provides back data. We will understand the data, and we will render the data for you in the same way that we render the navigation. If this is not sufficient, we are also thinking about a new kind of navigation extension, which is basically called the navigation rendering extension, name to be defined. This is kind of a code name. And the idea beside the navigation data rendering, the navigation rendering extension is, yeah, you replace our navigation. Here's the div. We give you the data, which is basically, this is what the navigation will have look like in this site. You do whatever you want. You want to show the data, you want to completely hide the data, you want to put flowers instead of data. You can do whatever you want because you own the div. Careful though, you will own the div, you will not own where to position the div. The navigation will always be in the place where the navigation shows. So if you are in a com site, we will give you the top nav div. If you are in a team site, we will give you the left nav div. If you want to move that, you can't. If you want to hide it, absolutely, you can hide it, no worries. But you will not be able, at the end of the session, I will answer the question, I promise. You will not be able to say, oh, I want to move the navigation div from left to right. This is not part of the feature. The next extensions that we are considering shipping as a new strongly typed extension is the footer extension, which, very simple, is a way to replace our footer. You will be able to, basically, we will give you a div, and we will tell, do whatever you want. We will give you the information to add comments or add some of our out-of-the-box feature, but similar to the navigation rendering extension, you can do whatever you want. You can hide the footer. You can hide the footer and then put the bottom extension placeholder to do whatever you want. You can add your custom footer and a bottom extension to do whatever you want. This is another thing that we're considering. Unfortunately, I don't have the timeline for that yet, but this is one of the things that we are really, really thinking about. Very quickly, one of the things that we mentioned at Ignite 2 weeks ago was Fluid Framework. Fluid Framework is this new framework that you can use in order to build blazing fast co-authoring real-time experiences across Microsoft 365 workloads in browsers. Jeff Tipper showed a fluid demo video during the keynote. I showed a fluid demo during the keynote, the dev keynote after Jeff Tipper. Then John looked at me and said, really, Luca, that's the only thing you can do? And I said, yes, I'm a PM, you're a developer. Then basically came to my office and said, I think you can do more. And I said, okay, prove me wrong. And he did.
So here we have SPFx, Fluid, Office UI Fabric React. We're using Teams, and we're going to show 2 different authors on the same page as well. We have Megan over here on demo page 1 and Nestor over here. We have a color picker from Office UI Fabric that we can modify, and you'll see changes are happening across this page and the Teams tab.
Woohoo!
You can modify it from either page. So if we want to go here and change it, we'll see the same changes that are propagating. We have a different page with the same web part. We'll see that changes are still propagating. We have a people picker that will show, adding people, and finally some text.
So basically what he's doing is using the Fluid framework behind the, under the hood in order to be able to synchronize the data across multiple instances in multiple browsers, including Microsoft Teams, by the way, without being able to do anything. So you don't have to refresh, you don't have to do anything. By using the Fluid framework, the data gets synchronized across multiple instances, and this is really in real time. And that was really it. Thank you very much for being with us. If you guys have any questions, now it's the time.